He owns 3 companies and $40 million, but tonight he's wearing a coat from a thrift store and watching his declined credit card sit on the table like a confession. Nathan Cole tests every woman he meets, fake flat tires, forgotten wallets, made-up debts, because his ex-wife taught him that love follows money and leaves when it dries up. Then he meets Victoria, who pays his bill without a word, never knowing she's a billionaire too, never knowing they're both lying. Stay with me to the end. Like this video and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. The card came back declined the way Nathan had paid the waiter to make sure it would, and still, for half a second, his stomach dropped like it was real. That was the part nobody understood about the game. He'd built it himself, brick by brick, over 4 years and 11 women, and he still felt the heat crawl up his neck every single time the little machine beeped its rejection and the waiter said, with that practiced apology, "Sir, I'm afraid this one isn't going through either." His own voice, the one that had closed deals with men who flew private, came out thin and embarrassed. Sorry, can you try it one more time?" The waiter, a kid named Marcus, who Nathan had slipped $200 to in the alley behind the restaurant an hour earlier, played his part better than most. He frowned at the card, ran it again, shook his head. "Same thing. You want me to bring the manager?" No, it's fine." Nathan set his jaw and looked down at the table, at the half-eaten plate of pasta he'd ordered because it was the cheapest entree on the menu, and he waited. This was the moment. This was always the moment. In his experience, and he had a great deal of it now, more than he'd ever wanted, there were 3 kinds of reactions, and you learned everything about a person in the 4 or 5 seconds it took them to choose one. The first kind got quiet. Not kind quiet, the other kind. The kind where a woman's face went very still and polite, and you could watch her recalculate the whole evening behind her eyes, the way you'd watch someone discover a stain on a couch they were thinking of buying. Lauren had been that kind. So had the realtor, and the one who taught 3rd grade, and the one whose name he was honestly starting to forget, which told him something he didn't like about himself. The second kind got generous and loud about it. "Oh my gosh, don't even worry. Here, I've totally got this." Big smile. Phone already out to split it or cover it, narrating the whole time how it was no big deal, how things happen, how money didn't matter to her at all. And then 2 dates later, the questions. Casual at first. "What do you do again? Where do you live? Is that a rental?" Generous people who needed you to know they were generous because the generosity was the down payment on a return they expected to collect. The third kind just left. Nathan had stopped being surprised by any of them. That was the worst part. If he was honest in the place he tried not to be honest. He'd built a machine to confirm what he already believed, and the machine worked, and every time it worked it broke something a little smaller inside him until there wasn't much left to break. So when the woman across from him said, "Here, let me," and reached for her purse, Nathan filed her under Category 2 and felt the familiar gray tiredness settle over him, and he started composing the polite way he'd end the night early. Except she didn't narrate it. She didn't say it was no big deal. She didn't smile the big reassuring smile or pat his hand or do the thing where they made you feel small by being so visibly, performatively big about it. She just pulled out a worn leather wallet, not a designer one, a real one, scuffed at the corners, slid a debit card across to Marcus, and went back to her water like nothing had happened, like she'd reached over and turned down a radio that was a little too loud. "It's the chip readers," she said, mostly to herself, mostly to no one. "Half of them in this part of town are about a decade past when they should have been replaced. Happened to me twice last month." Marcus took the card, glanced at Nathan with the faintest flicker of something, confusion maybe, this wasn't in the script, and went to ring it up. Nathan sat there. "You didn't have to do that," he said, and he hated how careful his own voice sounded, like a man feeling for the edge of a step in the dark. "I know." She shrugged. "You looked like you were about to die of embarrassment, and the pasta was fine, and I didn't want to sit here and watch a grown man have a nervous breakdown over $11. She looked up at him then, and her eyes were a plain gray-brown, no makeup he could detect, a small scar through one eyebrow. "It's $11, Nathan. We'll survive it." Her name was Victoria. He'd known her for exactly 40 minutes. He had met her the way he'd given up expecting to meet anyone, which was to say by accident and through nobody's effort, in a place he'd had no plan to be. His daughter Emma was 7 and going through a phase of fierce, total obsession with a particular kind of cinnamon roll that one specific bakery on Pell Street made and nobody else on earth made correctly. Nathan had picked her up from his ex-wife's on a Tuesday. Diane got Mondays and Wednesdays, he got Tuesdays and the weekends, and the lawyers had spent $40,000 carving that line so precisely that neither of them could remember anymore why they'd fought so hard for a Tuesday. And Emma had announced from the back seat that her entire week, her whole life, would be ruined unless they got the cinnamon roll, and so they had gone. The bakery shared a wall with the diner, the Bluebird, a small, ugly, beloved-looking place with a hand-painted sign and a window full of pie under glass domes, the kind of diner that had been there 40 years and would either last 40 more or close next month, no in between. Emma had her cinnamon roll. She also had, it turned out, an urgent and non-negotiable need to use a bathroom, and the bakery's was out of order, and so Nathan had carried her, half running, into the Bluebird next door and asked the first person he saw, a woman in an apron clearing a table, where the restroom was. "Back left, past the pie case," the woman said, not even looking up. And then she did look up, at Emma's pinched, panicked face, and she set down the dishes and said, "Come on, sweetheart, I'll show you. It sticks a little." And she walked them back herself and jiggled the door handle that did, in fact, stick. And she crouched down to Emma's level and said something that made Emma laugh through her urgency. And Nathan stood there holding a cinnamon roll in a paper bag, feeling, for a reason he couldn't name, like he'd walked into the middle of something. When Emma came out, the woman had a small paper cup of water waiting and a single saltine on a napkin. "For the tummy," she said to Emma, very seriously. "My grandmother swore by it. Probably nonsense, but it can't hurt." "Thank you," Nathan said. "Really? We just barged in." "People barge in here all day. That's kind of the point of the door." She wiped her hands on the apron. "You two want anything? Coffee?" She looks like she could use a stack of pancakes after all that drama. "I had a cinnamon roll," Emma announced, as though this were both an accomplishment and a tragedy. "Then you're a woman who knows how to plan a Tuesday," the woman said, and Emma, who did not give her approval easily to strangers, beamed like the sun had come out. They stayed for pancakes. Nathan hadn't planned to. He'd planned to be in and out, the way he planned everything now, every interaction load-bearing, every minute accounted for. But Emma wanted pancakes, and the woman, Victoria, the name tag said, hand-lettered like the sign out front, moved through the diner with an ease that Nathan found himself watching the way you watch good footage of something difficult done well. She knew the regulars. She knew an old man at the counter took his coffee with so much cream it was barely coffee anymore. And she knew the line cook's kid had a recital coming up, and she carried 6 plates on one arm and made it look like nothing. And when a guy near the window snapped his fingers at her, actually snapped his fingers, she went over and refilled his water and said something low and even, and the guy stopped snapping. Nathan didn't get her number that day. He wasn't an idiot. You didn't ask a woman for her number while your 7-year-old was syrup to the elbows, and there was a line forming at the register. But he came back the next Tuesday, alone, and ordered pie he didn't want, and the Tuesday after that, and on the 3rd Tuesday, Victoria set down his coffee and said, "You don't actually like the pie, do you?" And he said, "Not really, no." And she laughed, a real one, surprised out of her, and that was how it started. What he knew about her after 3 weeks of Tuesday pie, she volunteered at the Bluebird 4 nights a week. Not worked? Volunteered. The diner ran a program where the late shift fed anyone who couldn't pay, no questions, and they were always short-handed, and she'd started coming in to help and never stopped. She drove a gray Honda that was at least 8 years old. She wore the same 3 or 4 flannel shirts on rotation. She tipped the bakery kid next door enormous amounts and got embarrassed when he caught her at it. She listened more than she talked, which Nathan had stopped believing women did. And when she did talk, she said things that were true instead of things that were nice. And the difference between those two had become, over the bad years, the only thing he listened for anymore. What she didn't know about him, after 3 weeks, everything that mattered. He told her his name was Nathan Cole, which was true. He told her he did some consulting, contract stuff, kind of feast or famine, which was a lie so worn smooth from use that it didn't even feel like lying anymore. He'd let her see the thrift store coat and the beat-up Toyota he kept specifically for this, garaged it 3 blocks from the real cars like a man keeping a mistress. And he'd let her draw the conclusions he'd built the props to draw. The first dinner, the real first dinner, the one with the declined card, he'd planned the way he planned all of them. He'd chosen the restaurant for its cheapness and its proximity to the diner. He'd briefed Marcus. He'd rehearsed the embarrassment in the car. The whole architecture of the evening was a trap, and he'd walked Victoria into it because that was what he did. That was the only way he knew how to find out if a person was real, by pretending to be a person who had nothing and seeing what they did with that. And she'd paid $11 and called it the chip reader and gone back to her water. He should have felt vindicated. Category 2, the generous loud ones, didn't pay quietly. They paid like it was a press release. Victoria had paid like it was nothing, which according to his entire system meant she either didn't care about money or didn't have much of it to care about, and either way, it didn't slot into any of his categories. And the not slotting bothered him all the way home and into the next morning and through a meeting where he stared at a quarterly projection and saw, instead, a scuffed leather wallet sliding across a table. He found himself doing the thing he never did, which was thinking about a woman when she wasn't part of a test. "You're weird today," Diane said when he dropped Emma off. They could be almost civil now, in small doses, on neutral ground. The hatred had cooled into something more like the ache of an old brake before rain. "I'm fine. You've got a face." Diane crossed her arms in the doorway. She still knew his faces. That was the cruel residue of 8 years. "Is it a woman?" "It's nothing. It's a woman." She wasn't gloating. If anything, she looked tired. "Nathan, whatever it is you do, the thing." She made a vague gesture, and he understood exactly what she meant because she'd been the one to teach him the lesson the game was built around. Don't do it to someone who doesn't deserve it. You can't tell anymore who deserves it. That's the whole problem with you. He didn't answer. Emma was already running up the walk to the door, and the conversation, as their conversations did, dissolved before it could become a real one. Here is what Victoria knew about Nathan after 3 weeks. His name. That he had a daughter he clearly loved past all reason. That he was lying about something. She didn't know what yet, but she'd built an entire life on reading people fast, and Nathan read like a page with a paragraph cut out of it. The sentences on either side didn't quite meet. She didn't push. She'd learned not to push. People showed you what they were eventually, if you stopped grabbing at them, and besides, she had her own cut-out paragraphs, and she was in no position to demand of anyone a thing she wasn't offering back. Because Victoria Sinclair was not a diner volunteer who drove an old Honda. Victoria Sinclair was the founder and chief executive of Meridian Holdings, which she had started at 23 out of a 1-bedroom apartment, and which now, 7 years later, employed 9,000 people across 4 countries and had made her, on paper, worth somewhere north of $2 billion, a number so large it had stopped meaning anything to her, the way a word stops meaning anything if you say it too many times. The Honda was real. She'd kept it on purpose, the way some people kept a chair from a childhood house. The flannel shirts were real. The diner was the realest thing in her life. What was not real was the life everyone thought she had. The one in the magazine profiles. The one with the apartment that took up a floor of a building she also owned. The one with the staff and the security detail she'd fought to reduce to a single man named Hector, who waited outside the diner in an unmarked car every night and pretended, kindly, not to know what she was doing in there. The galas. The board meetings where men twice her age explained her own company to her. The endless, grinding performance of being a young woman in a chair that the world had decided she was too young and too female to be sitting in, so that every decision she made was either proof she was a genius or proof she was a fraud, and there was no third option and no rest. She'd found the Bluebird by accident, 18 months earlier, on a night she'd left a fundraiser early because she couldn't breathe in the room and had driven without a destination until she'd seen the hand-painted sign and the pie under glass and had walked in a $5,000 dress and ordered coffee, and the owner, a woman named Rosa, 70 years old, hands like tree roots, had looked at the dress and looked at her face and said, "Honey, you look like you've been crying in a parking lot." And Victoria had said, "I have, actually." And Rosa had said, "Sit. I'll bring you something. And that had been the end of one life and the beginning of the only part of her life she'd ever chosen freely. She didn't tell people who she was. Not at the diner. Rosa knew. Rosa had figured it out within a month and had said nothing. Just started leaving the late shift roster where Victoria could see the gaps. An invitation without words. But the regulars didn't know, and the line cook didn't know, and Nathan didn't know. Nathan, who lied about something. Nathan, with the cutout paragraph. Nathan, who watched her pay $11 like she'd done something extraordinary, and who didn't know, couldn't have known, that the reason she'd paid without a flicker, without a thought, was that she'd long ago lost the ability to feel money as money, and that the gift of the moment, for her, was that for once she got to spend it on something that felt like a person and not a transaction. They were, both of them, hiding fortunes from each other. Neither of them knew it. The whole thing was a held breath, and it had been held since the first cinnamon roll, and it was going to have to come out eventually because that was the nature of held breaths. But not yet. The second real date was Victoria's idea, which Nathan hadn't expected and didn't have a script for. "There's a thing," she said, on a Tuesday, sliding into the booth across from him on her break, which was the kind of thing she'd started doing. "On the river. Friday nights they do this market, food trucks, terrible cover bands, the whole deal. It's kind of awful. You want to go? You're selling it really hard. I'm being honest. The band will be bad. The tacos are good though, and it's free, which," she gave him a look he couldn't fully read, "I figured might matter." There it was. She'd clocked the money thing, or what she thought was the money thing. She was being delicate about it, building him an exit that wouldn't cost him anything, and the kindness of it landed somewhere under his ribs and stayed there, irritating, like a splinter you can feel but can't find. "Free works," he said. The band was, as promised, bad. The tacos were, as promised, good. They walked along the river with paper plates, and Victoria pointed out the buildings and told him which ones she liked and which ones she thought were ugly and why, and she had real opinions about architecture, it turned out, sharp and specific ones. And when he asked where that came from, she got briefly evasive in a way that pinged his radar before she said, "I read a lot. Long flights." And then, before he could ask what long flights, she pivoted. "Tell me about Emma's mom." That's a turn. You don't have to. He did, though. That was the strange thing. He found that he wanted to, which was its own kind of alarming, because the rule of the game was you gave nothing real until you'd confirmed they were real, and he hadn't confirmed anything. And here he was on a riverbank telling a diner volunteer about Diane. "We met in college, married at 24. He stopped. Recalibrated, the way he always had to, sliding the real numbers down to fake ones. "I was just getting started, building something. Working all the time, and it was good for a while, and then it wasn't. And the thing about it not being good is it happens so slow you don't notice. And then one day you're standing in a kitchen, and you realize you've been roommates for 2 years. He turned the paper plate in his hands. She left. There was... Money got involved. In the divorce, it got ugly, the way it does. And I came out of it thinking some things about people that probably weren't fair but felt true. Still feel true, some days." "What things?" He looked at her. The river moved black and quiet beside them, and the bad band was murdering a song he half recognized, and Victoria was watching him with those plain gray-brown eyes, the scar through her eyebrow catching the string lights. "That people want what you can give them," he said, "and when you can't give it anymore, they go." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "That's a lonely way to walk around." "It's an accurate way." "Those aren't the same thing." She said it gently, but she said it, and Nathan felt the splinter again, deeper. "I've known a lot of people who were sure they had everybody figured out, sure that everyone was working an angle, and the thing I noticed about them," she dropped her plate in a trash can, wiped her hands, "is that they were usually the ones working the angle. You see the trick everywhere because you carry it with you." It was so close to the truth, so close to the exact shape of the thing he was at that very moment doing to her, that for a second Nathan couldn't speak. She didn't know she'd said it. She was just talking, just being honest in the way that had hooked him in the first place. But she'd reached into him and put a finger on the rotten board and pressed, and it had given a little, and he had to look away at the river so she wouldn't see his face do whatever it was doing. "Maybe," he said, Maybe, she agreed, letting him off the hook, and she bumped his shoulder with hers, the first time she'd touched him on purpose, and they walked the rest of the way back not saying much, and Nathan drove home in the beat-up Toyota and sat in the garage for 10 minutes before he went inside, with his hands on the wheel and the engine off, trying to remember what the test had been for. The third date, Emma came. That hadn't been the plan. Nathan didn't bring women near Emma. That was a line he'd drawn in his own blood the day the divorce finalized, that his daughter would not be a prop in the wreckage of his judgment. But Diane had a work thing, a sudden one, and Nathan had a standing Tuesday at the diner that had stopped being a test a while ago, even if he hadn't admitted it, and so he'd brought Emma, planning to keep it short, planning to keep the two halves of his life from touching. Emma remembered Victoria. Of course she did. Kids remembered the people who crouched down to their level and meant it. "You're the saltine lady," Emma said, climbing into the booth. "I am the saltine lady," Victoria agreed with total gravity. "It's not on my business card, but it should be." "Do you have a business card?" "No," said Victoria, who had a drawer full of them at an office across town with a title on them that would have stopped this entire conversation cold. "Do you?" "No," said Emma, delighted by the absurdity. "I'm 7. Tragic. No business cards until at least 8, that's the rule. What got Nathan, what genuinely got him, sitting in that booth watching his daughter and this woman he was lying to negotiate the terms of childhood business cards, was that Victoria didn't perform it. He'd watched women perform at Emma before. The bright voices, the eye contact aimed at him, "Look how good I am with your kid," performance for an audience of 1. Victoria didn't look at him once. She got down into the conversation with Emma like it was the only conversation in the world, asked her real questions, listened to the rambling 7-year-old answers about a friend named Priya and a hamster situation at school, and laughed at the parts that were actually funny and not at the parts that weren't. And Emma who was guarded, Emma who had watched her parents come apart and had learned young to hold herself back, Emma opened up like a flower in time lapse. At one point, Emma spilled her chocolate milk, the whole glass, across the table and into her own lap, and her face did the thing it did right before the storm, the crumple, the held breath, the wide, panicked eyes flicking to Nathan, because in the old house spilled things had sometimes been the first domino of a bad night. And before Nathan could even move, Victoria had a stack of napkins down and was saying, easy as anything, "Oh, classic, I do this constantly. Rosa won't let me carry full glasses anymore. She makes me fill them halfway. It's humiliating." And she was mopping and joking, and the storm in Emma's face broke up before it could land. And Emma laughed instead of cried, and Nathan sat there with a fistful of his own useless napkins, and felt something in his chest that he didn't have a category for, and that scared him more than any declined card ever had. Later, after he'd dropped Emma at Diane's and driven home and lay awake, he tried to talk himself back onto solid ground. "She's good with kids. Lots of people are good with kids. It means nothing. You still don't know who she is. You still haven't confirmed it." But the words felt like what they were, which was a man arguing with himself in the dark, losing. Because here was the thing he could no longer not see. He'd built the game to protect himself. He'd told himself it was about finding someone real. But somewhere in the 11 women and the 4 years, the game had stopped being a way to find love and become a way to avoid it. A moat he'd dug so wide that nobody could cross it, which had been, he understood now, lying in the dark, the actual point all along. You couldn't be left if you never let anyone in. You couldn't be fooled if you fooled them first. The test wasn't a test. It was a wall with a test painted on it. And Victoria had walked up to the wall and paid $11 and crouched down to talk to his daughter about business cards. And the wall was still standing, but for the first time in 4 years he could see over it. And what was on the other side terrified him, because it looked like a future. And he'd thrown away his last future with both hands and sworn he'd never reach for one again. "You're smiling," Rosa said, the next night, when Victoria came in for the late shift in her flannel and her old jeans. Rosa missed nothing. Rosa was practically made of not missing things. "Am I?" "At the order pad. You're smiling at the order pad." The order pad did not earn that smile. Rosa narrowed her eyes, ancient and shrewd. "It's the Tuesday man. With the little girl. His name is Nathan. I know his name. I'm asking what he is." Victoria tore off an order, clipped it to the wheel, didn't answer right away. Through the pass, she could see the dining room, the late crowd, the people who came in at 11 because 11 was when the program ran and nobody asked you anything. A man and his 2 kids in a corner booth. An old woman she'd seen a dozen times who never spoke and always left exactly when the plate was clean. "He's lying to me," Victoria said finally. "About something. I don't know what." Rosa didn't gasp. Rosa had seen everything twice. "And you keep seeing him." "I keep seeing him." "Why?" Victoria thought about it honestly, because Rosa was the one person on earth she didn't perform for. "Because everybody I know is lying to me," she said. "Every single person in my whole life, Rosa, every one of them wants something, and they're all so smooth about it, so polished, they've got the whole thing down to a science, and Nathan's so bad at it." She laughed a little, and it came out raw. "He's such a bad liar. He thinks I can't tell. And there's something about a man who's bad at lying that feels almost like a man who's telling the truth. At least he's not good at it. At least he hasn't had practice. At least—" She stopped, because Rosa was looking at her the way Rosa looked when she was about to say something Victoria wouldn't want to hear. "You're doing it too," Rosa said. "Whatever he's hiding, you're sitting here in your flannel shirt with your $2 billion hiding right back. You ever think about that, honey? You two might be the same kind of liar, and the same kind of liar always finds each other, like a key and a lock cut from the same blank." Victoria didn't have anything to say to that. She picked up 2 plates and pushed through into the dining room, and she fed the man with 2 kids, and she refilled the silent old woman's coffee. And the whole time Rosa's words sat in her like a swallowed stone, because they were true. And the worst thing about Rosa was that she was always, eventually, true. The next Tuesday, Nathan didn't run a test. He noticed himself not doing it. He'd packed the props that morning out of habit. The wallet he could forget. The line about the car making a noise, the whole kit. And he'd gotten to the diner and sat in the booth, and Victoria had come over and sat across from him on her break, and he'd just talked to her. Real things. He told her about a deal he was working on, sanded down to nothing, just a project at work that's keeping me up. And she'd asked smart questions about it, smarter than the cover story warranted, and he'd had to be careful, and being careful with her had started to feel less like protection and more like a wound he was refusing to let close. "Can I ask you something?" he said, "and you don't have to answer." "You can ask me anything. I just told you I don't have to answer, so we're even." "Why do you do this?" He gestured at the diner, the apron, the late hour she wasn't even on tonight. She'd just come in. 4 nights a week. You're not getting paid. You work. You've got a day thing, right? You said something about a day thing. I have a day thing. So you work all day and then you come here and work all night for free. Why? Victoria was quiet for long enough that he thought she might pick the not answering option. Then she said, "Because in here, nobody needs anything from me except a plate of food. And I can do that. I can put a plate of food in front of a person, and it's the whole thing, start to finish, no angle, no second meaning. They're hungry, I feed them, they're less hungry. It's the only place in my life where what I do and what happens are the same size." She looked at her own hands. Out there, everything I do turns into something I didn't mean. In here, it just stays what it is. He understood her completely, and she didn't know that he did, because for her, out there was a billion-dollar company, and for him, out there was the same thing under a different roof, and they were sitting in the same booth describing the same loneliness from 2 directions, and neither of them could see it because they were both still holding their breath. "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in years," Nathan said, and he meant it. And the irony of saying it to her while wearing a coat that was a lie was so sharp it was almost funny. "Stick around," Victoria said. "I'll lower the bar." She smiled when she said it. He smiled back. And under the table, in the pocket of the thrift store coat, Nathan's hand closed around the wallet he'd brought to forget. And he understood, finally and fully, that he wasn't going to forget it tonight, and that he didn't want to test her, and that somewhere in the last few weeks the entire architecture of how he'd kept himself safe had quietly come apart in his hands, and he hadn't even noticed it falling. He drove home that night the long way, past the river where the bad band had played, past the bakery with the cinnamon rolls, and he kept his hands at 10 and 2, and he thought about a woman who fed strangers for free because it was the only honest thing in her life. And he thought about the lie he was telling her, growing every day, getting heavier. And he thought about the moment that was coming when he'd have to either bury it forever or set it down between them and see what she did. He didn't know yet which one he'd choose, but for the first time since a kitchen, and a slow realization, and a marriage he'd watched die in inches, Nathan Cole drove home wanting something he was afraid to want, and the wall he'd built was still there, all of it, every brick. But the gate in it was standing open, and he'd left it open on purpose, and he hadn't done that in 4 years. And he lay awake half the night not knowing whether he'd just saved himself or set himself up for the exact kind of fall he'd spent his whole adult life learning to never take again. Across the city, in an apartment that took up a whole floor of a building she owned, a billionaire took off a flannel shirt that smelled like coffee and griddle smoke and stood at a window looking down at a city full of people who all wanted something from her. And she thought about a man who was a bad liar, and she did not know that the bad liar was about to become the best thing and the worst thing that had ever happened to her. And she went to sleep, and the held breath kept holding, on both sides of the city, in both of their chests, waiting for the morning that would eventually come when one of them would finally have to let it go. The morning came the way mornings did, indifferent to all the breath being held across the city, and it did not resolve anything. That was the part Nathan kept waiting for and that kept not arriving. The day where he'd wake up, and either the wanting would have burned off in the night like fog, or it would have hardened into a decision. Instead, it just stayed, low and constant, a weather system that had moved in over his chest and showed no sign of leaving. So he did what he always did with things he couldn't resolve. He kept showing up. Tuesdays became Tuesdays and Thursdays, then Tuesdays and Thursdays and a Sunday afternoon, and then a Wednesday that nobody had planned, because Victoria had texted him a photo of a dog she'd seen tied up outside a hardware store, just the dog, no caption. And he'd texted back asking what the dog's name was, and she'd written, probably Gerald, and he'd laughed out loud alone in his actual office, the real one, the one with his actual name on a door he'd paid an actual fortune for. And a woman walking past in the hall had glanced in at him, the boss, laughing at his phone like a teenager, and he'd had to turn his chair to the window. The texts were the dangerous part. He understood that even as it was happening. A dinner you could script. A date had edges, a beginning and an end, a card to fail to swipe. But the texts came at all hours and from no plan, little fragments of her ordinary mind. Gerald, a complaint about a parking ticket, a question about whether he thought it was insane that a regular at the diner put hot sauce on pie. He did think that deeply. And there was no way to test a text. There was no prop you could plant in a message at 2 p.m. The texts were just her, unguarded, and they were just him, unguarded back. And a thing was building between them in the gaps between the dinners that he had no system for and no defense against. "You text a lot," Diane said. They were doing the handoff at her place, Emma's backpack and a forgotten stuffed rabbit and the logistics of the week. Diane had caught him glancing at his phone twice. "I've never seen you text. The whole time we were married, you treated your phone like it owed you money. It's work." "It's not work. Work doesn't make your face do that." She handed him the rabbit. She wasn't being cruel. They'd gotten somewhere, the two of them, in the years since the worst of it. Somewhere that wasn't friendship, but wasn't war either, a demilitarized zone they kept clean for Emma's sake. Emma mentioned a lady. At a diner. Nathan went still. "She did. Said she's the saltine lady. Said she's funny." Diane folded her arms in the doorway, the same way she had weeks ago, the posture she took when she was about to tell him something for his own good that he wouldn't want. "Nathan, I'm going to say one thing and then I'm going to stop, because it's not my business, and I lost the right to make it my business. But that little girl has had enough people walk into her life and walk back out. If this lady's just another one of your—" She searched for the word, didn't find a kind one, settled on experiments. "Then keep Emma out of it. You hear me? It's not an experiment." He said it too fast, and they both heard it. Diane's eyebrows went up. "Huh," she said. And then more quietly, with something in her voice he hadn't heard directed at him in years, something almost like the old tenderness before it, had all curdled. "Then God help you. You're actually in trouble." She caught herself. "Figure of speech. You know what I mean. You've got a face like a man standing on a frozen lake who just heard a crack." He drove home with the rabbit on the passenger seat and Diane's words knocking around in him because the awful thing was, she'd been the one to teach him the lesson the whole game was built on. She'd left. She'd taken the money, and the lesson had been carved into him in that lawyer's office. People want what you can give, and they go when it's gone. And now here she was, the architect of his entire defensive crouch, looking at him in a doorway and telling him he was in trouble. And the trouble she meant wasn't the old trouble. It was the new one, the worse one, the one where you wanted something. Victoria, for her part, was lying to more people than usual and getting tired of it. She lied to her board, but that was different. That was just the ordinary professional lying of saying, "We're confident in the projections," when she was not confident in the projections. She lied to the gossip columnist who wanted to know who she was seeing, which was easy because the answer, "A man who thinks I'm a waitress, we eat tacos by the river, his daughter is teaching me about the social hierarchy of second grade," was so far outside anything they could imagine that her flat denial sounded like the truth. She lied to Hector, a little, when she told him she'd be at the diner, and instead had Nathan pick her up 2 blocks away in his terrible Toyota so that Hector wouldn't follow, and Hector, who was not stupid, let her, because Hector had decided some time ago that the diner and whatever grew out of it was the only thing keeping his employer from coming apart at the seams, and he protected it the way he protected everything else about her, silently and against her own worst instincts. But the lie that was starting to cost her was the one to Nathan. It cost her in small moments. It cost her the night he picked her up and his car wouldn't start. Really wouldn't start. Not a test. She could tell the difference now. She'd watched him run the wallet thing twice in the early weeks and had said nothing and had let him think she hadn't noticed. And he'd sat there cranking the engine and swearing under his breath and finally said, "I'm so sorry. I think it's the starter. This is embarrassing. I'll call a tow. You don't have to." And the whole time she'd had to sit on her hands, because she could have fixed it. Not the car, the situation. She could have made one phone call and had a man with a flatbed there in 11 minutes, or had a new car delivered by morning, or simply paid to make the entire category of worrying about a starter vanish from his life forever. And she had to sit in the passenger seat of a dying Toyota and pretend that a broken-down car was a real and serious problem, because to him it was, or he'd built his whole self to pretend it was. And either way, she couldn't reach across that gap without revealing everything. So she'd said, "I've got AAA. Hang on." And she'd called a tow with her own non-billionaire phone and her own perfectly ordinary membership that she kept precisely so that moments like this would hold up, and they'd sat on the curb in the cold waiting for it, shoulders touching, and he'd been so grateful and so embarrassed and so human about the whole thing that she'd felt the lie like a hand around her own throat. "You're not what I expected," he'd said, on the curb, watching for headlights. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. When you've had a bad enough run of things, you stop expecting. You just sort of brace." He'd had his elbows on his knees, looking down the dark street. "And then you don't brace, with one person, and you don't even notice you've stopped until you catch yourself." She'd wanted, right then, more than she'd wanted anything in a long time, to tell him. "Nathan, I have to tell you something. I run a company. I have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. The Honda is a prop, same as I think your wallet thing is a prop. I think we're both—" But the tow truck had turned the corner, yellow lights swinging across the buildings, and the moment had closed like water over a dropped stone. And she'd said nothing, again, one more time, the way she'd said nothing 100 times now. Later, she'd sat in her enormous quiet apartment, still in her coat, and called the one person she could. "It's late," Rosa said, by way of hello. Rosa kept diner hours. Late meant nothing to her. "His car broke down tonight. The real car. The bad one." And I sat there and I couldn't help him. I just sat there. Victoria pressed the heel of her hand into one eye. "Rosa, I could have fixed his whole life with a phone call, and I sat on a curb and pretended I had AAA like a normal person." "You do have AAA. You showed me the card. You were very proud of yourself." "That's not the point." "I know it's not the point." Rosa's voice gentled the way it did, the gravel in it softening. "Honey, you want to know what I think? I think you're not upset you couldn't help him. You're upset you couldn't be you and help him. You wanted to be the whole of yourself, the rich part and the curb part, sitting there on that curb, and you couldn't because he only knows half of you. And that's a lonely feeling, sitting next to someone you like and only being allowed to be half. Rosa let that land. But that's a feeling you built, sweetheart. Same as he built his, whatever his is. You can take it down anytime you want. That's the thing about a wall you built yourself. You always have the key. He built one too. I know he did. I've met liars. He's a liar. A pause. He's a worse liar than you, though, which is something. The good liars never feel bad about it. He feels bad. I can see it on him from the kitchen. That's what I keep telling myself. It's not nothing, but it's not everything either. And then, because Rosa was Rosa and would not let her end a call comfortable, the longer you both wait, the worse it lands. You know that. You're not stupid. Whatever this is, it's got a clock on it, and the clock doesn't care how nice the tacos are. Victoria knew. That was the thing. She knew, the way you know about a bill that's coming due, the way you know about a tooth that's going to need a root canal, eventually no matter how long you chew on the other side. There was a reckoning out there in the future with both their names on it, and every good day they had together. Every dog named Gerald, every taco, every curb was, in a way she didn't like to look at directly, just more weight on the wrong side of the scale. The better it got, the worse the fall would be when the truth came out. She was, without meaning to, raising the stakes of her own eventual betrayal a little higher every single day. But she kept showing up too. That was the symmetry of it. Both of them knew better. Both of them came anyway. The thing that broke the equilibrium when it finally cracked came through Emma. It was a Saturday, one of Nathan's full weekend days, and the plan had been simple. He and Emma and Victoria were going to the Science Museum, the one with the giant pendulum that knocked over the little pegs to prove the Earth was turning, which Emma had decided was the single most important fact in the universe. Victoria had never been. I keep meaning to, she'd said, which was true. She'd funded a wing of it through one of her foundations, and had never once walked through the doors, a fact so absurd she couldn't begin to explain it to Nathan, so she didn't. They'd been there an hour, Emma towing them both by the hands toward the pendulum, when Emma suddenly veered the way kids do, drawn by something brighter, and bolted toward an exhibit across the hall, and a crowd swallowed her, and for 10 seconds that Nathan would remember for the rest of his life, she was gone. He didn't think. He moved. He went through the crowd calling her name with a sound in his voice that Victoria had never heard from him, a stripped animal sound, all the careful guarded surface of him gone in an instant, and Victoria moved the other direction, fast, scanning low, child height, the way she'd somehow known to do, and it was Victoria who found her. Emma crouched and entranced in front of a tank of jellyfish, perfectly fine, perfectly absorbed, having no idea she'd vanished from her father's world and detonated it. Hey, sweetheart. Victoria crouched beside her, kept her voice level even though her own heart was going. You scared us. You can't run off like that, okay? You have to stay where Dad can see you. There's jellyfish, Emma said, as if this excused everything, which to a 7-year-old it did. And then Nathan was there, and he dropped to his knees on the museum floor and pulled Emma into him hard, too hard, and Emma squirmed and said, Dad, in the embarrassed way. And over the top of his daughter's head, Nathan looked at Victoria, and his face was wide open, wrecked and open. The fear hadn't finished draining out of it yet, and it had taken all his careful walls with it on the way down. And for one long moment, Victoria was looking at the actual man, not the consultant with the feast or famine cash flow, not the careful man who watched her pay for things, but the father who just felt the floor open under him and then felt it close again. Thank you, he said. His voice wasn't steady. She was fine. She was always fine. Victoria reached out and squeezed his shoulder, and he was shaking, just slightly, the fine tremor of adrenaline leaving the body. Nathan, she's okay. Breathe. He breathed. Emma had already moved on, narrating the jellyfish, immortal in the way only a loved child can be, with no idea of the cost of the love. And Nathan stayed kneeling on the museum floor a moment longer than he needed to, and Victoria stayed crouched beside him, and something passed between them that was past the point of testing, past the point of props and cover stories, a thing that had nothing to do with money on either side, and that neither of them could lie their way back from. They got coffee after, in the museum cafe, while Emma worked her way through a cookie the size of her own face and informed them at length about jellyfish, which it turned out had no brains and no hearts, and did fine, which she found both hilarious and somehow personally reassuring. "I lost it back there," Nathan said quietly, while Emma was occupied. "I'm sorry, that wasn't—" "You don't apologize for that. Ever. Are you kidding?" Victoria turned her cup in her hands. "You know what I saw back there? I saw a man who loved something so much it could kill him. That's—" She stopped, surprised by the thickness in her own throat. "I don't see that a lot. In my world," she almost said. "In the world where everyone is so polished and so guarded and so busy managing each other that nobody lets themselves love a single thing that hard. Because loving something that hard is a liability. It's an exposure. It's a position someone can take advantage of." "I don't see that a lot," she finished lamely, and he didn't push, and she was grateful. "She's the only thing I got right," Nathan said. "Out of all of it. The marriage, the way it ended, all of it. She's the one thing I didn't ruin." "You're not going to ruin her." "You don't know that." "No," Victoria agreed, "but I know what ruined looks like. I've seen a lot of it, and it doesn't look like a man who falls on his knees in a museum." She watched Emma offer the silent, dignified universe a piece of her cookie, an offering to the jellyfish 30 feet away. "It looks like a man who never falls on his knees about anything. Trust me on that one." It was, again, the most honest thing she'd said to him, and again it was wrapped around a lie, because I've seen a lot of it meant boardrooms and galas and the particular emotional frostbite of the very rich, and he didn't know that, and she let him not know it, and she hated herself a little, in the museum cafe, with the cookie crumbs and the immortal child and the man whose walls had fallen down in front of her. She hated herself for being the only one at the table who still had a wall up, and for knowing it, and for keeping it up anyway. After the museum, the shape of it changed. They both felt it. Whatever the thing was, it had crossed a line in front of the jellyfish, and there was no recrossing it. He started letting her closer to Emma, which terrified him, which he did anyway. Victoria started coming to things. A school play where Emma was a non-speaking but extremely committed tree. A Sunday where they did nothing at all but exist in Nathan's small rented-looking apartment, the prop apartment, the one he kept furnished and lived in for exactly this purpose, while his real place sat across town, and ate grilled cheese and watched a movie Emma had seen 40 times and narrated all the way through. And Emma fell for her. That was the thing Nathan watched happen and couldn't stop and didn't, in the end, want to stop. Emma, who held back, who had learned to hold back, started saving things up to tell Victoria. Started asking on non-Victoria days when they'd see her. Started, one night, half asleep, calling her Vic, a nickname nobody used, that Victoria's board would have died before using, that her own dead parents had never used. And Victoria had gone so still, and her eyes had gone so bright that Nathan had had to look away to give her the privacy of it. "She likes you," he said later, after Emma was down. They were on the couch in the prop apartment, a careful foot of space between them, a foot that had been getting smaller for weeks. "I like her." Victoria pulled her knees up. "I didn't expect— I don't, usually. Like kids. Is that a terrible thing to say? They're sticky and loud, and they ask you the same question 40 times. But she's—" She shook her head. "She pays attention. She watches everything. She watched me put hot sauce in my coffee by accident last week, and she didn't say anything. She just filed it away, and 3 days later she told her teacher that grown-ups make mistakes, and that's why you have to be patient with them. She quoted me to her teacher. I've been quoted in shareholder letters, and it never—" She stopped. Shareholder letters. It had just come out. She covered it fast, badly. "I read about, shareholder letters, companies. It never felt like that." Nathan didn't catch it. Or he caught something. A snag. A place where the fabric pulled. But he was getting good at not catching things about Victoria because he didn't want to find the cutout paragraph anymore. Didn't want to know what she was hiding, because he was hiding the same kind of thing, and he understood now that two people could agree, without ever discussing it, to not look too hard at each other's locked doors. He let it go. He let it go the way she'd let his wallet thing go on the curb. They were taking turns now, not looking. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "And have you not make it weird?" "I can't promise that. I make most things weird, but you can try." I haven't. He stopped, started over. After the divorce, there were women. I'm not going to pretend there weren't, but I never let any of them near her, not once. I had a rule. Emma doesn't meet anyone because Emma's already watched one set of people fall apart, and I wasn't going to let her get attached to somebody who was just going to. He made a vague gesture. Go. And you let me meet her. I let you meet her by accident, the bathroom thing. He almost smiled. But after that, I could have kept the lines apart. I'm good at keeping lines apart. It's kind of my whole. It's a thing I do. And I didn't. I let them touch, and I keep waiting to feel like I made a mistake, and I don't feel it. He looked at her, and the careful foot of space between them was suddenly the only thing in the room. I don't feel it. That's what I wanted to tell you. I keep waiting for the part where I want to put the wall back up, and I can't find it. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. There was a version of this moment. She could see it, fully formed, a door standing open, where she said, Nathan, I have to tell you who I am. And she walked through it, and they had it out, all of it. The company and the Honda and the wallet and the AAA, and maybe it survived and maybe it didn't, but at least it would be real. At least the clock Rosa kept warning her about would stop ticking. She didn't walk through the door. She leaned across the careful foot of space instead and kissed him. Because it was easier. Because it was true even if it wasn't honest. Because the kiss didn't require her to say a single word about who she was, and he kissed her back like a man who'd been holding still for 4 years and had finally let himself move. And the wall she'd built, and the wall he'd built both stayed standing, but for that one long moment neither of them was behind theirs. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers and laughed, a little shaky. Okay, he said. Okay, that happened. That happened, she agreed. I'm probably going to overthink it for like 9 days. I'm going to overthink it on the drive home. I'm very efficient. I'll have it done by the time I get there. But on the drive home, she didn't overthink the kiss. She thought about the door she hadn't walked through. She drove her prop Honda back to her real apartment, past the diner with its dark windows, past the river, and she sat in the parking garage the way Nathan sat in his, hands on the wheel, engine off, and she understood with a clean and terrible clarity that she'd just made it so much worse. Every day made it worse. The kiss made it worse. Emma calling her Vic made it worse. The better it got, the more there was to lose. And the more there was to lose, the more unforgivable the lie became. And she was building the unforgivable thing with her own 2 hands a little more every single day, and she could not seem to stop, because stopping meant telling the truth. And telling the truth meant maybe losing all of it. And she was not. She could admit it now, alone, in a concrete garage. She was not brave enough yet. Nathan wasn't brave enough either, and he knew it more sharply now because of Emma. It was one thing to lie to a woman you were testing. He'd made his peace with that years ago, packed it away in the part of him that did the cost-benefit work. But it had stopped being a test, and Victoria had stopped being a subject. And now the lie wasn't a tool. It was just a lie, a plain, ugly one. And it had his daughter's fingerprints on it now, too, because Emma loved her. And Emma didn't know that the woman she loved had been brought into her life as part of an experiment her father was running on people's hearts. That was the part that started keeping him up. Not getting caught. The shape of the thing itself. He'd run the test 11 times to find out if a woman would love him without his money. And he'd finally found one who treated him with more decency than he'd shown a single person in 4 years, who fed strangers for free, who'd found his daughter in a crowd and crouched down to her height to bring her back. And what had he given her in return? A counterfeit. A man-shaped lie in a thrift store coat. She'd passed every test he'd ever invented, and he was rewarding her by being the exact kind of person his tests were supposed to weed out. Someone running an angle. Someone with a second meaning behind everything. The very thing she'd described hating about her own world without knowing she was describing him. You see the trick everywhere because you carry it with you. She'd said that on the riverbank weeks ago, and it had pressed on the rotten board, and the board hadn't held then, and it sure as hell wasn't holding now. He went to see Diane, not to talk about Victoria, he told himself that, but to drop off Emma's inhaler, which Emma had left, and which wasn't urgent, and which they both knew wasn't urgent, and Diane let him in and made coffee. Neither of them wanted, and they sat at her kitchen table, the kitchen of the house he'd bought her in the settlement, and he found himself talking. "How did you know?" he said. "When it was over. With us." How'd you know it was actually over and not just bad? Diane didn't answer right away. She'd remarried briefly, and that had ended too, and she'd come out of both wreckages with a kind of plain-spokenness that he sometimes envied. I knew it was over, she said, when I started managing you instead of talking to you. When I stopped saying what I meant and started saying the thing that would get the result I wanted. That's when it's over, the day you start running the person instead of being with them. She looked at him over her coffee. Why? No reason. Nathan, there's a woman. He turned the mug in his hands, his father's habit, his own habit now. And I haven't been straight with her about some stuff, and it started it doesn't matter how it started, but it stopped being that. And now I'm in this place where the longer I wait, the worse it is, and I can't figure out how to... He stopped. How do you tell someone you've been lying to them when the only reason you're telling them is that you don't want to lie to them anymore? Doesn't the lie poison the part where you stopped? Diane was quiet for a long time. Outside, a dog barked twice and quit. You know what I wish you'd done, she said finally, back when it was us? I wish you'd lied to me less and trusted me more. You think the money's why I left. You've built your whole life around the idea that the money's why I left. She shook her head slowly. I left because you tested me, Nathan, the whole time. You don't even know you were doing it, but you were always setting up these little exams to see if I'd pass. And a person can feel that. A person can feel being measured. I left because I was tired of being a thing you were grading. She let that sit between them, 8 years late, the truest thing either of them had ever said in that kitchen. So if you've got a woman and you stopped grading her, and that's why you can't stand the lie anymore, then for once in your life you might actually be doing it right. The fact that it hurts to tell her, that's the part that's new. That's the part you never had with me. Don't waste it. Nathan drove home with the truth Diane had handed him sitting beside him like a passenger, heavier than the rabbit had been, heavier than anything. I left because you tested me. He'd built a religion out of the idea that she'd left for the money, and it had been a lie too, the foundational one, the lie under all the other lies, and he'd been running tests for 4 years to defend himself against a thing that had never been true. The money hadn't driven her away. He had. The grading had. The wall had. And he was doing it again, had nearly done it again, had brought the whole apparatus to bear on the one person who'd walked up to it and paid $11 and crouched down to find his daughter in a crowd. He pulled into the garage of his real building, the tall one, the one with his actual life in it, and he sat with the engine off and his hands on the wheel and across the city in another garage. Victoria was doing the very same thing, the two of them bookending a city full of people who wanted things, each holding a held breath that had gone from sweet to unbearable, each knowing the same thing now with the same clarity and the same cowardice, that it could not go on, that it would not go on, that one of them was going to have to set the truth down between them, and that whoever did it first was going to have to do it soon, before the loving made it so big that the telling could not survive the weight of it. Neither of them knew, sitting in their separate dark garages with their separate enormous secrets, that the choice was already being made for them, that the clock Rosa kept warning about had been running faster than either of them guessed, and that the breath they'd both been holding for so long was about to be let go, not gently, not on anyone's terms, in a room where the truth would come out all at once and leave nothing standing that hadn't been built to last. The road ran out on a Thursday, and it ran out because Nathan finally chose to end it himself, which was the one thing he'd never let himself plan for. He'd decided in the garage, sitting there with Diane's words still ringing, I left because you tested me. He'd understood that there were only 2 ways this went. He could bury the lie so deep it became a permanent foundation, marry Victoria someday on top of it if she'd have him, raise Emma in a house with a sealed room in the basement that he'd spend the rest of his life making sure nobody opened. Or he could set it down now while it was still possible to call it a confession instead of a discovery. He knew which one Diane would tell him to pick. He knew which one he could live with. He just didn't know if he could survive the picking. He told Victoria he wanted to cook her dinner. The real him would have taken her somewhere with cloth napkins and a sommelier, but he wasn't ready to be the real him yet. That was the whole point of the night, to become the real him in front of her. So he did it in the prop apartment, the small lived-in lie of a place. And that was its own kind of fitting, that he'd tell her the truth in the most carefully constructed false room he owned. Emma was at Diane's. He'd made sure of that. Whatever happened, Emma wasn't going to be in the building for it. Victoria knew something was wrong before she got her coat off. She'd spent her whole life in rooms reading people who were about to deliver bad news, and Nathan was giving off all of it. The too bright greeting, the hands that didn't know what to do, the way he'd cleaned the apartment past the point of normal. "You're nervous," she said, sitting at the small table, watching him not quite manage the pasta. "You've rearranged the salt and pepper 3 times. "I'm not nervous." "Nathan, I run." She caught it the way she always caught it and rerouted. "I've sat across from a lot of nervous people. You're nervous? Just tell me. Whatever it is, just... I'd rather you said it than watched you move the salt around for an hour." He turned off the burner. He'd planned a whole approach, a soft on-ramp, a way to lay it out in a sequence that would make her understand the why before she got hit with the what. All of it left him at once. He stood at the stove with his back to her and then turned around and just said it, the way you pull a thing out of a wound, fast, because slow is worse. "I have money," he said. "A lot of it. The consulting thing, the feast, or famine, that's not real. I own 3 companies. I'm worth around $40 million. The car that breaks down, the wallet I forget, the card that gets declined, those aren't accidents. I set them up. I've been setting them up since the first night I took you to dinner." The kitchen got very quiet. Victoria didn't move. "I had this, I don't even want to call it a theory. It makes it sound smarter than it was. After my divorce, I got it in my head that nobody could love me without the money. That the second a woman knew what I had, that's all she'd see. And she'd stay for it and leave when it got hard, the way I thought Diane did. So I started testing. I'd pretend to be broke. Pretend the card didn't work. Pretend the car died. See how a woman reacted when she thought I had nothing." His voice was getting worse, not better, the more of it he said. "You were number 12, the 12th woman I ran it on. The declined card our first night, Marcus, the waiter, I paid him $200 to make it bounce. The starter that wouldn't turn over. That one was real, actually. That one I didn't fake. But I'd faked so many by then it doesn't matter. You couldn't have known the difference, and neither could I anymore." He made himself look at her. "I'm telling you because it stopped being a test. Somewhere in there it stopped, and I didn't notice when. And I couldn't keep lying to you and Emma both. That's it. That's the whole thing." He'd braced for a lot of reactions in the imagining of it. He'd pictured tears, pictured anger, pictured her going quiet and recalculating the way the Category 1 women used to. He had not pictured the thing that actually happened, which was that Victoria laughed. One short, awful, disbelieving sound that had no humor in it at all. 12, she said. "Victoria, I was number 12. She stood up from the table slowly, like her body wasn't fully cooperating. "You ran it on 11 other people and then me. The card, the wallet, the..." Her face was changing, working through it in real time, each piece landing and detonating. "Emma. You used Emma. You brought your daughter into a control group?" "No, Emma was never part of..." "She met me by accident, you said. The bathroom. And then you decided to keep letting it happen. You said it yourself. You could have kept the lines apart. You're so good at keeping the lines apart, and you chose not to. You watched your kid get attached to me. You watched her start calling me Vic." Victoria's voice cracked on the nickname, and she hated that it did, hated showing him that it had landed somewhere soft. "And the whole time I was what? A subject. You were running an experiment, and I was the rat in it, and your 7-year-old daughter was the bait." "That's not..." "Victoria, that is not what it became. I don't care what it became." She said it loud, louder than she'd meant to, and then dropped her voice to something worse, something flat and shaking. "Do you have any idea at all, what it is to be a person who can't tell who's working her? I told you that. On the rail yard path. I stood there and I told you the single worst thing about my life. The thing that keeps me up, that I can't tell anymore if anyone's kind or if everyone's running an angle, and I told it to you because you were the one person I'd met in years who I was sure wasn't, because you were broke, because you had nothing to gain. That was the whole... That's why, Nathan. That's the entire reason I let you in. You had nothing to gain from me. And it turns out you had everything, and you knew it, and you let me say all of that to your face while you were doing the exact thing I said I couldn't survive. And there it was, the cutout paragraph, except it wasn't his to find anymore, because she was about to hand it to him herself. And Nathan watched it coming the way you watch a glass go off the edge of a counter, too far away to catch. You want to know the part that's going to kill you, she said. You built a whole machine to find a woman who'd love you with nothing. You wanted somebody who didn't care about the money. And you found one. You found the one person in this entire city who genuinely, completely could not care less how much money you have. She was crying now, furious tears, the kind that come from rage more than grief. Because I have more than you'll ever see, Nathan. I run Meridian Holdings. I started it at 23. I'm worth a little over $2 billion. The Honda's a prop, same as your Toyota. The flannel shirts are a costume, same as your thrift store coat. I've been lying to you about exactly the same thing you've been lying to me about this whole time. And I was going to tell you. I came so close to telling you on the curb the night your car died. I had the words in my mouth. And the only reason I didn't is I was scared of exactly this. That the second the money was on the table, it would poison everything. And here we are, both of us. Two liars who found each other. Rosa called it weeks ago, and I didn't want to hear it. Nathan didn't say anything for a long moment. The pasta water was going cold on the stove. Somewhere in the building, a door closed and a TV came up through the floor. He couldn't get the sentence to start. Meridian. The actual Meridian. The one in the magazines, yes. The one with 9,000 employees, that one. She wiped her face hard with the back of her hand, angry at the tears, angry at him for seeing them. So you can stop worrying about whether I wanted you for your 40 million. I have 50 of those. I never needed $1 from you. Her voice went finally all the way down to the bottom. I needed the one thing you turned out not to have, which was that you were telling me the truth, and you weren't. You never were. Not for one single second from the first night. Neither were you, Nathan said. It came out before he could stop it, and the instant it landed, he wished he could pull it back, because it was true. And it was the worst possible thing to be true, and it didn't help. It didn't help anything. It just made them level. Two people standing in a fake kitchen who'd each been faking the floor. No, Victoria said. I wasn't. You're right. And if you told me the truth, I'd have told you mine. That's the thing you broke. Not the money. I don't care about the money. I keep telling you, I genuinely do not care about the money. She picked her coat up off the back of the chair. Her hands weren't steady. What I cared about was that there was one room in my entire life. One where I got to be a person instead of a balance sheet. The diner. And then you. You were part of that room. You were the realest thing I had, and you were a setup. You were staged. The whole time I was eating tacos by the river thinking, finally, here's something nobody built to manipulate me. You'd built it specifically to manipulate me. You sat across from me and watched me fall for the most honest version of you you'd ever let anyone see, and there was no honest version. It was props all the way down. That's not true. He came around the counter, not to touch her, just to be closer, to make her hear it. The man you've been with for 2 months, the walks, the rail yard, the dinosaur voices, the way I lost it at the museum when she vanished, that was real. That was all real, Victoria. The money's the only thing I lied about, and I stopped lying about it tonight. I came to you, you didn't catch me. I came to you. You want a medal for confessing. She said it quietly, and that was worse than if she'd shouted it. You ran a con for 2 months, and you want credit because you ended it before I found out on my own. Do you hear yourself? You're still grading, even now. You did the math and decided confessing would score better than getting caught, and you call that honesty. She got the coat on. I have spent my whole adult life around people who do exactly what you just did, who calculate the angle and then dress the calculation up as feeling. I built a diner-shaped hole in my week to get away from those people, and you're one of them. You're the best one I ever met, because you almost had me convinced you weren't. That's the part I can't. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I have to go. Victoria, please, don't. His voice broke on it, and it was the same stripped sound she'd heard at the museum, the wall-down sound, the real one. Emma loves you. That's not a prop. A kid can't fake that. Whatever I did, whatever I am, she's real and she loves you. And if you walk out, you're not punishing me. It was the wrong thing. He knew it was the wrong thing the instant it left him. Victoria went very still, and when she spoke, her voice had gone cold in a way he hadn't heard from her before. The CEO voice, the one that ran rooms full of men twice her age. Do not put that on me. Don't you dare make Emma the reason I have to stay and forgive a man who used her to run a test. That is the most... She shook her head, disgusted. You brought her into this. Not me. If she gets hurt when I'm gone, that's a thing you did. The night you decided your daughter's heart was an acceptable cost for finding out whether a stranger would pay your $11 dinner bill. Don't hand me that bill. I won't pay it. I've paid enough of yours. She got the door open. Cold air came in from the hallway. For what it's worth, she said, not turning around, her hand on the frame, I would have stayed. If you just told me, the first night, the 10th night, the night on the curb, any night before tonight, if you just said I'm not actually broke and here's the stupid reason I pretended to be, I'd have laughed and told you mine, and we'd have been two ridiculous rich liars who got lucky enough to find each other anyway. That was right there. That was so close. You had it, and you tested it instead. You always test it instead. That's the whole tragedy of you, Nathan. You'd rather know if it's real than have it be real. And then, softer, the anger draining out into something that was just grief, which was somehow the worst of all. I have to go before I say something I can use later to talk myself into coming back. Goodbye. She left. The door didn't slam. She closed it carefully, deliberately, which was somehow louder than a slam. And her footsteps went down the hall and down the stairs, and Nathan stood alone in the kitchen of a home he didn't really live in a coat that was a lie, next to a pot of pasta water going cold, and he didn't move for a long time. Out on the street, Hector's car was waiting where it always waited, 2 blocks down, and Victoria walked to it fast in the cold and got in the back, and Hector, who missed nothing, looked at her in the mirror and saw a face he hadn't seen on her in 18 months, not since the night she'd first walked into the Bluebird in a $5,000 dress with mascara down her face. Where to? He said quietly. Home. She stared out the window at the city going by, all of it full of people who wanted things, every single one. Just home, Hector, not the diner. I can't be in the diner tonight. Because the diner had been the one clean room and now Nathan was in it too, threaded all through it, the booth and the pie and the late shifts and the saltine, all of it tangled up with him now, and she didn't know if she'd ever get it back, the one room, the only one. And if Rosa calls, she said, tell her she was right. Tell her she was right, and I should have listened, and I don't want to talk about it. Hector pulled out into traffic. He didn't say anything else. He'd learned that about her too. When to talk and when to drive. Back in the apartment, Nathan finally moved. He poured the cold pasta water down the drain and stood looking at the empty pot. His phone sat on the counter, dark, and he picked it up and looked at the last text she'd sent that afternoon, hours ago. A different lifetime ago. A photo of a different dog she'd seen. No caption, the way she always did. Just a dog. Just a small, unguarded piece of her ordinary mind shared with him, because for some reason she'd decided he was a person worth sharing it with. He'd written back what's his name, and she'd written Gerald II, and he'd written, of course. And that had been the last thing, the very last thing, before the truth. He set the phone down. He did not text her. There was nothing to text. She'd been right about all of it. The grading, the calculating, the medal he'd wanted for confessing, the bill he'd tried to hand her with Emma's name on it. She'd read him faster and cleaner than anyone ever had, faster than Diane, faster than he could read himself. And she'd been right that the worst thing about him wasn't the lie. The worst thing was that he'd had it, the real thing, the one he'd torn his life apart hunting for, sitting right across the table from him, eating bad grilled cheese and doing dinosaur voices for his daughter, and he hadn't been able to just let it be real. He'd had to know. He'd had to test it. And the testing had been the thing that broke it, exactly the way the testing had always been the thing that broke it, all the way back to a kitchen and a marriage and a woman who'd left, not because of the money, but because she'd gotten tired of being graded. He thought about Emma. He'd have to tell her something. Not the truth, she was 7, but something because she'd ask about Vic. She'd ask tomorrow and the day after, And the day after that, "When are we seeing Vic? Can Vic come? Did you ask Vic?" And he was going to have to stand in front of his daughter and account, in some kid-sized way, for the fact that he'd taken the best thing in both their lives and put it on a scale to weigh it and watched it break in his hands. The TV was still coming up through the floor. The radiator ticked. Somewhere across the city, a billionaire was riding home in the back of a car, telling her driver that an old woman had been right, and somewhere closer a man stood alone in a borrowed kitchen. Understanding, far too late, that he'd spent 4 years and 12 women and untold thousands of dollars building an elaborate machine whose only real function, the only thing it had ever reliably done, was to make sure that the moment something true ever finally showed up, he would be standing there with the lever in his hand, ready to break it. He told Emma that Vic had to go away for work for a while. It was the cleanest lie available, and it tasted like ash, because lying was the exact disease that had gotten him here, and he was reaching for it again on reflex, the way a man with a broken hand still reaches with it, out of habit. But she was 7, and the truth was unspeakable in any form a 7-year-old could hold, so he said the work thing, and Emma accepted it the first day, and questioned it the second, and stopped believing it somewhere around the 4th. Vic would have said goodbye, Emma announced on the 5th morning, over cereal she wasn't eating. She'd developed a way of looking at him that was too old for her face, an appraising sideways look she'd gotten, he realized with a small private horror, from him. She does dinosaur voices. People who do dinosaur voices say goodbye. You did something. Eat your cereal. You did something. Not a question now. She pushed the bowl an inch away from her, a small, precise gesture of refusal. You always do something. You did something with Mom, and now Mom lives in the other house, and you did something with Vic, and now Vic does work forever. Her chin was doing the thing, the crumple, the held breath, but she didn't cry. She'd learned, the way kids of divorce learn, to swallow it, and watching her swallow it was worse than any tears would have been. I'm not stupid, Dad. I'm 7. That's basically 8. He didn't have an answer. There wasn't one. He'd built a life on the principle that you protected the people you loved by managing what they knew, and here was his daughter at a breakfast table seeing straight through the management, the way Victoria had seen through it, the way Diane had finally told him she'd seen through it for 8 years. And he understood that he'd raised a child smart enough to catch him, and that she was going to spend her whole life catching men like him unless he became a different kind of man fast enough for her to catch the change. You're right, he said. It came out rough. I did do something. I made a mistake with Vic, a big one, and I'm trying to figure out how to fix it, and I don't know if I can. Emma considered this with the gravity of a small judge. Did you say sorry? Not in a way that counted. Then say sorry in a way that counts. She pulled the cereal bowl back toward herself, the matter apparently resolved by logic so clean it embarrassed him. That's what you make me do, even when I don't want to. You say it's not real sorry if you only say it because you got caught. You have to say it because you're actually sorry. She ate a bite, finally. So which one are you? It landed harder than anything Victoria had said, harder than anything Diane had said, because it was his own rule handed back to him by the one person he'd genuinely never lied to about anything that mattered. It's not real sorry if you only say it because you got caught. He'd said that to Emma 100 times. And Victoria had said almost the identical thing in the kitchen. You want a medal for confessing? You're still grading. And now a 7-year-old with a cereal bowl had drawn the line for him bright and clear. There were 2 kinds of sorry, and he'd only ever known how to do the cheap kind. Across the city, Victoria was doing the thing she always did with pain, which was to feed it into the machine of her own life and let the machine grind it into output. She went back to Meridian like she was making up for lost time. Except there was no lost time. She'd never actually been gone. She'd just been somewhere better for a few hours a night. And now she shut that off and poured the hours back into the company, and the company took them gratefully, the way it always did, an organism with an infinite appetite for her. She took the meetings she'd been delegating. She flew to the regional office she'd been avoiding. She sat across from the men twice her age and ran them harder than she had in months, and they mistook her grief for ambition and respected her more for it, which was its own bleak joke. Hector watched it from the front seat and the doorways and the edges of rooms, the way he watched everything, and said nothing for 9 days. On the 10th, he broke his own rule. You haven't been to the diner, he said. They were in the car parked outside the Meridian Tower at 11 at night, the hour she used to leave to go be a person. I'm aware of where I have and haven't been, Hector. Rosa's called the car line 4 times. She knows I won't put her through if you don't want it. She keeps calling anyway. He didn't turn around. She told me to tell you the late shift short. She said you'd know what that means. Victoria looked out the window at the tower, all that glass, all that light burning at 11 at night for no one. The late shift's short, the roster with the gaps in it, the invitation without words, the thing Rosa had been doing for 18 months, leaving a space exactly Victoria shaped and trusting her to fill it. And she couldn't fill it because the diner wasn't clean anymore. Nathan was in it now, woven through the booth and the pie case and the late hours, and she didn't know how to walk back into the one room that had been hers without walking into him too. "Tell Rosa I'm fine," she said. "I'm not going to tell Rosa that. Rosa would know I was lying and then she'd be mad at me, and I have to drive past that diner every night." For the first time in 9 days, something almost like warmth came into his voice. "Miss Sinclair, I've worked for you a long time. I drove you the night you found that place. You were a different person walking out of there than you were walking in every single night for a year and a half. I don't know what the man did. It's not my business what the man did. But I know what the place did, and the place didn't do anything wrong, and you're punishing it like it did." She didn't answer. He pulled out into the empty street and drove her home, past the diner, where the lights were on and the late crowd was inside getting fed by someone who wasn't her, and she made herself look at it this time instead of looking away, and it hurt exactly as much as she'd known it would. The days kept passing. 11, 12. Nathan didn't text her. She kept checking, hating herself for checking, and the not texting was somehow both a relief and a fresh wound every morning, because the man who would chase her was a man she could be angry at clean, and the man who respected her enough to leave her alone was harder to hate, and she needed to hate him to stay gone. What broke it in the end wasn't Nathan, and it wasn't Rosa. It was a quarterly review of the Meridian Foundation's grants. A stack of paper a junior associate walked into her office on day 13, and a single line item near the bottom of page 4, a community services wing at the Science Museum funded 3 years prior, named for a donor who'd requested anonymity. Her. The wing she'd paid for and never walked through until the day she'd walked through it, holding a 7-year-old's hand toward a pendulum, and lost the 7-year-old in a crowd for 10 seconds, and watched a man fall to his knees on the floor of a building she secretly owned because he thought his daughter was gone. She sat with the page in her hand for a long time. The whole thing was in it somehow. The absurdity of her life, the wing she'd funded and forgotten, the day a man's terror had been more real and more honest than anything she'd seen in a boardroom in years. I saw a man who loved something so much it could kill him. She'd said that to him in the cafe, over cookie crumbs, and it had been true. It was still true, and the thing she'd been refusing to look at for 13 days finally turned its face to her. The money lie was the same as her money lie. They'd done the same thing for almost the same reason, but the man at the museum, the man on his knees, that hadn't been a lie. There was no version of that he'd staged. You couldn't fake the sound he'd made. She'd been telling herself it was props all the way down, and it was a clean story, a story she could leave on, but it wasn't true. And Victoria had built a $2 billion company on the discipline of seeing what was true even when a more convenient story was sitting right there. She didn't go to the diner. She went to his office. The real one. It hadn't been hard to find. She ran Meridian Holdings. Finding out that Nathan Cole owned 3 companies and which building the flagship sat in had taken one phone call she'd been refusing to make for 13 days because making it meant she wasn't done. His assistant didn't know who she was, which Victoria found she liked. She gave her real name and watched it mean nothing to the young man at the desk, and that was almost restful, being a stranger to someone. And then Nathan came out of his office because his assistant had buzzed him about a Miss Sinclair, and he'd known instantly, the way you know, and he stopped in the doorway and the two of them looked at each other across a reception area in a building she could have bought without noticing. "You have an office," she said, "a real one, with your real name on it." "I have an office." He looked terrible, which she was ashamed to find she was glad of. Thinner, not sleeping. "You want to... not here." He took her into his office and closed the door. It was a real office, an expensive one, tasteful in a way the prop apartment had been calculated to never be. And seeing him in it was disorienting, like seeing an actor out of costume. This was the man, the actual man, the $40 million man, and she'd never met him. She'd only ever met the one in the thrift store coat. "I'm not here because I forgive you," she said, before he could say anything. "I want to be clear about that walking in. I haven't decided anything. I came because I had a thought I couldn't get rid of, and I'd rather say it to your face than carry it around." "Okay." The museum. When Emma ran off. She watched his face change at the name, at Emma, the involuntary flinch of it. "You didn't know I'd paid for that building. There's no way you could have known. I'm an anonymous donor. Even my own board barely knows." So there was no audience. There was no version of you performing for me, because falling on your knees in a crowd doesn't score points. It just makes you look like a man losing his mind in public. You weren't grading anything in that moment. You couldn't have been. You were too scared to grade. She took a breath. "That was real. I've been telling myself for 13 days that all of it was staged, props all the way down, because it's easier to leave a con man than to leave a person. And the museum doesn't fit. So I came to find out which one you are, because I can't tell. And not being able to tell is the thing I can't live with. It's the whole thing, Nathan. It's what I told you on the rail yard path before I knew you were lying about everything else. I need to know if there's a real person under there or if it's props all the way to the bottom." Nathan was quiet. He came around the desk and didn't sit, leaned against the front of it, close enough that she could see how badly the last 2 weeks had gone for him. "My daughter asked me yesterday," he said, "whether I was sorry because I was actually sorry, or sorry because I got caught. Those are her words, 7 years old. It's a rule I taught her. That's the part that gets me. I taught her the difference and then spent my whole adult life only knowing how to do the cheap version." He rubbed his face. "You said the same thing in the kitchen. You want a medal for confessing. You're still grading, and you were right, and Emma's right, and I've had 13 days to sit with how right you both are. So here's the honest answer to your question, and you're not going to love it because it's not clean. I don't need it clean. The man at the museum is real. The man who lost it when Emma vanished. That's the truest I've ever been in front of anyone. You're right that I couldn't have faked it, and you're right that there was no audience. That's real." He looked at her. "And the man who set up the declined card is also real. The man who graded you, who calculated that confessing would land better than getting caught. That's not a costume I can take off and show you the real guy underneath. That's me too. There's no real person under the props, Victoria. There's a real person who built the props. Same guy. The terror at the museum and the con at the dinner table came out of the exact same place. I'm so scared of losing the people I love that I'd rather control whether they leave than risk that they might. With Emma, I can't control it, so I just live in the terror. With you, I thought I could control it, so I built the test. It's the same fear. It just wears two faces." He shook his head slowly. "I don't have a clean answer where the good Nathan was trapped inside the bad Nathan the whole time. It's all one Nathan. He's just finally scared enough of being alone to maybe stop." Victoria didn't say anything for a moment. It wasn't what she'd come hoping to hear. She'd come, she understood now, half wanting him to give her the clean version, the trapped good man version, so she could either accept it or reject it and be done. And he'd refused to give it to her. He'd given her something messier and worse, and she realized with a lurch, far more believable. A man claiming there was a hidden good version of himself was running an angle. A man telling her the terror and the con came from the same root and he couldn't separate them. That was either the truth or a con so sophisticated it had wrapped all the way back around, and she'd spent her whole life around the sophisticated kind. And this didn't feel like that. This felt like a man who'd run out of better stories. "Emma thinks you went away for work," Victoria said finally. "I'm guessing. For a while. She stopped believing it on day 4. She's smarter than me, which isn't a high bar lately." His mouth did something that wasn't a smile. "She misses you. I'm not saying that to move you. You told me not to hand you that bill, and you were right. It was the worst thing I said that night, and I've thought about it every day since. I'm not handing it to you. I'm just answering the question I think you're not asking. Yes, she misses you. No, that's not your responsibility. It's mine. I'm the one who brought her into it. I just didn't want to lie to you about it by leaving it out. I'm trying to do this new thing where I don't lie to you by leaving things out. It turns out I have to think about it consciously, like a foreign language." That got something out of her. Not a laugh, but the ghost of where a laugh would go, the muscle memory of 2 months of finding him funny. She hated that it was still there. She'd hoped 14 days might have killed it, and it hadn't. It was right there, intact. Finally, a man with values, dinosaur voices, the dog named Gerald, all of it sitting in her chest fully alive. "I want to tell you something, and I want you to just hear it," she said. "I would have stayed. I said that the night I left, and I meant it, and I've turned it over 100 times since, and it's still true. If you told me the truth any night before that one, I'd have laughed and told you mine, and we'd have been fine. That's the part I keep grieving. Not what you did, but how close we came to it not mattering. We were 2 rich liars who could have just put the lies down on any given Tuesday and been free. And you tested it instead. You always test it instead." She stood up. "Here's where I am. I'm not over it. The betrayal is real and it still hurts, and some mornings I wake up furious at you before I'm even fully awake. That doesn't go away because you gave me an honest answer in a nice office, but..." She made herself say it, the thing she'd decided somewhere over the last hour without admitting she was deciding it. "But I don't think you're props all the way down. I think you're a scared man who builds props, which is different and worse in some ways and better in others. And I'm not willing to throw away the one thing in years that made me feel like a person because you were too afraid to be honest about the same thing I was too afraid to be honest about. That would make me a hypocrite, and I have enough flaws without adding that one." Nathan didn't move, didn't dare. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying one chance. One. And conditions, real ones, not romantic movie ones." Her voice was steady now, the CEO voice, but underneath it something was shaking, and she let him hear that it was shaking. "No more tests, ever. Not the small ones either. I know how you work now. I'll see them coming, and the first time I catch you grading me, weighing me, setting up some little exam to see how I'll react, I'm gone and I don't come back, and you don't get to confess your way out of it because there won't be anything left to confess to. Absolute honesty. Even the stuff you'd protect me from, especially the stuff you'd protect me from, because protecting me from the truth is just the polite word for what you've been doing this whole time." And her voice caught here. Finally, the only place it caught. "And Emma is not a chip you get to bet again. Whatever happens with us, slow, however slow, she doesn't get jerked around. If I'm in her life, I'm in it carefully and for real, or I'm not in it at all. She's been used once, not twice, not by you, not by me, not by accident." "Okay," Nathan said. His voice wasn't working right. "Yes. All of it. Yes. Don't say yes that fast. That's a salesman saying yes. Take a day. Take a week. Look at what I actually said, because every single thing on that list is a thing you've spent 4 years doing the opposite of. And if you say yes that fast, it means you haven't understood that I'm asking you to dismantle the entire way you've kept yourself safe. I'm asking you to stand there with no wall at all, and just trust that I won't leave, with no test to confirm it first. That's the deal. There's no test. You have to do the thing you've never once done, which is not check." She picked up her bag. "That's terrifying. I know it's terrifying. I'm asking anyway, because I'm not willing to do the slow, polished version of love that everyone in my world does, and you're the only person I've met in years who could maybe do the other kind, but only if you put the lever down. The one you've been holding your whole life, the one that breaks the thing the second it gets real. Put it down. For good. Or don't call me." She left his office the way she'd left the apartment, carefully, deliberately, the door clicking shut instead of slamming. And Nathan stood in the middle of his real office, with his real name on the door, and understood that she hadn't forgiven him exactly, and hadn't come back exactly, but had done something harder and stranger than either. She'd handed him a door and told him it was up to him whether to walk through it without testing the floor first, and that across the city, Emma was waiting to find out which kind of sorry he was, and that for once in his life there was no angle to play, no exam to set, nothing to calculate. Just a terrifying open space where the wall used to be, and a choice about whether he could finally, at 32, learn to stand in it. He took the week. That was the first thing he did differently. He didn't call her that night, didn't fire off the salesman's yes she'd warned him against, didn't show up at the diner with flowers and a speech. He sat with the list. He wrote it down, actually wrote it on a legal pad like it was a term sheet, because terms were a language he understood. And then he sat at his real desk in his real office and went down it line by line and made himself feel the size of each thing she was asking. And she'd been right. Every single item was a thing he'd spent 4 years doing the exact opposite of, and saying yes to all of them at once meant taking the wall he'd built and pulling it down brick by brick with no guarantee that anything good would be standing on the other side when he finished. The hardest part wasn't the no more tests. That one he could at least understand as a rule, even if following it would feel like walking a tightrope with no net. The hardest part was the last one, the Emma one, because it forced him to look directly at the thing he'd spent 2 weeks not looking at, which was that he had in fact bet his daughter's heart that Victoria had named it precisely the night she left, and he'd tried to hand the bill back to her, and she'd refused to pay it, and she'd been right to refuse, and the bill was his, and it had his daughter's name on it, and there was no confessing his way out of that one because the person he'd hurt couldn't be reasoned with in a nice office. She was 7. She just knew Vic was gone and her dad had done something. So before he called Victoria, he did the harder thing. He sat down with Emma. "I need to tell you something true," he said, "and it's going to be a grown-up thing, and you can ask me anything you want about it. Vic didn't go away for work. I lied about that. She went away because I lied to her about something big for a long time, and it hurt her, and she had every right to go." Emma absorbed this with the terrible steadiness she'd been developing. "What did you lie about?" "I pretended to be poor. I have a lot of money, and I pretended I didn't because I was scared, and I wanted to see if people would still like me, including Vic, and that was a wrong thing to do to a person, and an extra wrong thing to do when the person had when you'd gotten close to her. Because you didn't sign up to be part of a test. You just liked her, and I let you like her while I was doing a wrong thing in the background. That part's on me, not on you, and not on her." Emma was quiet for a long time, the cereal bowl judge convening her court. "So you tested her," she said finally, "like a spelling test." "Kind of like that, yeah." "That's mean. You don't test people you love, you just love them." She said it with the devastating simplicity of someone who hadn't yet learned how hard that was, hadn't yet built her own walls, and Nathan felt it go through him clean. "Is Vic mad at me?" "No, God, no, baby." The word slipped out, and he let it, the only time in the whole story it would, the involuntary tenderness of a frightened parent, and then he set it aside. "She's not mad at you even a little. She misses you. She told me so. She's only mad at me, and she's right to be." "Then say sorry the real way and bring her back." "It's not that simple, Em." "Why not?" Genuine bewilderment. "You did the wrong thing. You say the real sorry. You don't do it again. That's the whole thing. That's what you make me do." And there it was again, his own rule, clean and unanswerable in the mouth of a child. And he realized that everything Victoria had asked him for in that office, every condition on her list, was just the adult version of the thing his daughter had understood since she was old enough to be made to apologize to a friend. You don't test people you love, you say the real sorry. You don't do it again. The whole architecture of his ruin had been an elaborate, expensive 4-year way of avoiding 3 things a 7-year-old could state in one breath. He called Victoria that night. Not to deliver the yes. He'd decided he wasn't going to deliver a yes at all, because a yes was a word, and words were what he'd poisoned. He called to ask for something instead. "I'm not going to tell you I accept your conditions," he said when she picked up. There was a silence on the line that had a question in it, because that's just me saying the right thing, and saying the right thing is what I'm good at, and it's exactly what you shouldn't trust. So I'm not going to say it. I'm going to do it, slowly, where you can watch, and you can decide as you go whether you believe it. I called because I told Emma the truth tonight. All of it. The money, the test, the part where I let her get close to you while I was running it. She said," his voice did something. "She said you don't test people you love. You just love them. And that I should say the real sorry and not do it again, and that it's the whole thing. She thinks it's simple. She's 7, so she thinks everything's simple. But she might be right that it's simple, and I'm the one who made it complicated to avoid doing it." Another silence. Then Victoria said carefully, "You told her the real version, not a kid-shaped lie, a kid-shaped truth. There's a difference. I'm learning the difference. It's a foreign language, like I said. A beat. She wants to see you. I'm not saying that to move you. I'm saying it because it's true, and you told me not to leave true things out. What you do with it is yours. That's the second time you've said that. I'm not saying it to move you. I know. I'm bad at this. I'll get less bad. And that was where it started. The slow part. The part that had no movie in it. Because the truth Victoria had insisted on, and the truth Nathan was clumsily learning to live in, was that there is no scene where the wall comes down all at once and the music swells. There's just a man, every day, choosing not to reach for the lever, and a woman, every day, deciding whether to believe he hasn't. It took months. That was the honest shape of it. Not a reconciliation, a renegotiation, conducted in daylight, with both their real names on it this time. The first thing they did was the diner. Victoria asked for that specifically, and Nathan understood why without her explaining. The diner was the one clean room she'd had, the place where she got to be a person instead of a balance sheet, and he'd gotten into it without knowing what it was, and the only way to give it back to her was to be in it honestly. So on a Tuesday, he came to the Bluebird, not the prop Toyota, his real car, parked right out front where she could see it, and he walked in wearing a coat that was just a coat, no story attached to it, and Rosa took one look at him from behind the counter and said, loud enough for the whole place, "So this is him, the one who can't lie worth a damn." "That's me," Nathan said. "Sit. I'll bring you something. You look like she's been running you in circles." "She has. I've earned it." "Good answer." Rosa narrowed her ancient eyes at him, the full force of 70 years of reading people, and whatever she saw, she filed away without comment, and brought him coffee. And that was the closest thing to a blessing the Bluebird offered, which was no blessing at all, just a plate of food and the absence of suspicion, which from Rosa was the same as love. Victoria came out of the back in her flannel and her apron, and seeing her in it again, the costume that wasn't a costume, the realist version of her, undid something in him, and he didn't perform the undoing, just let her see it on his face, which was the new discipline, letting her see things instead of managing what she saw. "You came to the diner," she said. "You said this was your clean room. I got into it dishonestly, figured the least I could do was come back honest." He turned the coffee cup in his hands, his father's habit, his own. "I'm not going to be weird about it. I'm not going to make it a whole thing. I'm just going to be a guy who comes to the diner and tells the truth and tips well, if that's allowed." "Tipping well at the place I volunteer is a little redundant." "Then I'll tip well at the bakery next door. Gerald II's people probably need it." And there it was, the ghost of the laugh, except this time it landed all the way, a real one, surprised out of her the way the first one had been, weeks and a lifetime ago when she'd said, "You don't actually like the pie, do you?" She caught herself laughing, and her face did something complicated, because laughing at him was a betrayal of how angry she still was. And she let him see that too, the conflict of it, and he didn't try to capitalize on the laugh, didn't lean in, just let it be a thing that happened and then receded, and that the not capitalizing was maybe the first real evidence she had that he'd actually heard her. The old Nathan would have used the laugh, would have read it as a green light and pressed. This one let it pass. That was the rhythm of the months. Small tests of his not testing, which he passed by failing to test. She'd give him an opening, a softening, a laugh, an old joke, and watch to see if he'd grab it, and he wouldn't. He'd let it sit, and the letting it sit was the whole language they were building now, a vocabulary of restraint. She'd say something with an edge in it, bait almost, and he'd just answer it straight instead of managing it. She told him once, months in, "I keep setting little traps to see if you'll go back to grading me. You know that, right?" I figured. "Doesn't that bother you, that I'm testing you now?" "No." He thought about it, because she'd taught him to actually think before he answered instead of reaching for the smooth thing. "You earned the right to. I tested you 11 times and lied about it. You get to test me out loud and tell me you're doing it. That's not the same thing. That's a person being careful about a man who gave her a reason to be careful. I'd be worried if you weren't." She'd looked at him a long moment after that, and something had shifted, some small load-bearing beam, because he'd taken the one thing that would have enraged the old him, being measured, being graded, being tested, and he'd recognized it as fair, as hers to do, as the natural cost of what he'd done. The man who couldn't stand to be tested had learned to stand still and be tested and not flinch, because he finally understood it from the other side. Emma was the slowest and most careful part, and they did it right, both of them, which was the thing Nathan was proudest of when he looked back. They didn't just hand Emma her Vic back like nothing had happened. Victoria insisted on that. "She got attached, and then I vanished," Victoria said. "That happened to her. We don't get to pretend it didn't because the grown-ups worked it out. She's owed an honest version too, a kid-sized one." So the first time Victoria saw Emma again, it wasn't a grand reunion. It was the diner, on a Tuesday, arranged in advance so Emma wouldn't be ambushed, and Emma had come in holding Nathan's hand and stopped about 10 feet away, and looked at Victoria with the appraising sideways look, the one she'd gotten from him, and said, "You went away." "I did," Victoria said. She crouched down, the way she had the very first day, to Emma's height, where the conversation lived. "And I'm sorry I went away without saying goodbye to you. That part wasn't fair to you. You didn't do anything wrong. The grown-ups had a problem, and you got caught in the middle of it, and that's not how it's supposed to work. Kids aren't supposed to get caught in the middle. My dad tested you, like a spelling test. That's why you went." Victoria glanced up at Nathan, a question, and he nodded. He'd told Emma the truth. She could speak to it truthfully. "Yeah," Victoria said, "he did. And it hurt my feelings, because you don't test people you care about. You told him that, I heard. You were right." "I'm usually right," Emma said, with the magnificent confidence of 7. And then, the real question, the one underneath. "Are you going to go away again?" And here was the moment Nathan watched Victoria do the thing he loved her for, the thing he'd watched her do the very first day with a spilled chocolate milk. She didn't lie to make it easy. The old Nathan would have had Victoria say, "Never. I'll never go away again, I promise." The smooth, reassuring thing, the thing that buys a kid's trust cheap and breaks it later. Victoria didn't. "I don't know," she said. "I hope not. I really hope not. But I'm not going to promise you something I can't be sure of, because that's a kind of lying too, and your family's had enough lying. What I can promise is that if anything ever changes, I'll tell you to your face, and I'll say goodbye, and you'll never again find out I'm gone by just noticing one day that I am. That part I can promise. Is that okay?" Emma considered it with the gravity of a small judge weighing a settlement, and Nathan held his breath because it was a real offer, an honest one. And honest offers don't always satisfy a 7-year-old who wants the world to be safe and permanent. But Emma, who watched everything, who'd watched one set of grown-ups come apart and learned young to read the fine print, seemed to find the honesty more trustworthy than a promise would have been, because she nodded slowly and said, "Okay, that's better than never." Never is what Mom said about Dad, and then they got the other house. The adults absorbed that. There was, Nathan thought, a whole philosophy in it, delivered by a child over the wreckage of 2 divorces. That never was the word people used right before they broke a thing, and that an honest "I hope so," and I'll tell you the truth either way, was worth more than the prettiest promise. Victoria reached out, and Emma, after a moment, stepped into the hug. And over the top of his daughter's head, Victoria looked at Nathan, and it wasn't forgiveness exactly, and it wasn't the old easy warmth, but it was the start of a floor that was actually a floor this time, built in daylight, with no room sealed in the basement. The money, when they finally dealt with it, turned out to be the smallest thing, which was the cosmic joke of the whole story. They'd both nearly destroyed their lives over money. Nathan testing women to prove they didn't want his, Victoria hiding hers so people would treat her like a person. And when they finally put their actual numbers on the table, his 40 million and her 2 billion, sitting in her real apartment that took up a floor of a building she owned, they'd looked at the absurdity of it, and Nathan had said, "So I'm the poor one in this relationship." And Victoria had said, "By a wide margin, yes, it's embarrassing for you." And they'd laughed, both of them, the kind of laugh that has grief in the bottom of it, because the money had never been the thing. It was never the thing. It had just been the costume both their fears had worn. 2 people terrified of being loved for the wrong reason, who'd each lied about money to find out if the other would love them for the right one, and had nearly killed the right one in the process of testing for it. "You know what kills me," Victoria said, that night in the apartment. "We did the exact same thing, the same fear, the same lie, the same... We were both so sure the money would poison it that we poisoned it ourselves trying to protect it. If we just walked in honest on day one, two rich liars, no costumes, we'd never have gotten close, Nathan said. That's the part I keep landing on. If you'd walked into that first dinner as Victoria Sinclair, billionaire, I'd have run the same defensive crouch I ran on everybody, except worse, because the stakes would have been higher. And if I'd walked in as Nathan Cole, 40 million, you'd have put up the same wall you put up around everyone in your world. The lies are how we met. That's the awful thing. The costumes are the only reason we ever got close enough for the costumes to matter. He turned it over. Doesn't excuse keeping them on, just, I don't think there was a version where we walked in honest. We were both too far gone for that. The honesty had to come later, the hard way, after we'd already given each other a reason to want it. It was the truest thing he'd said in the whole long stretch of it, and it had no comfort in it, just accuracy. And Victoria had taught him that those two things were different, and that she'd take accuracy over comfort every time. And she took it now, and reached over. And that was the night, months after the kitchen, after the office, after the slow, careful rebuilding, that the careful foot of space between them finally closed for good, and stayed closed. The penthouse, his real one, the one that had sat dark across town through the whole charade, the one he'd kept like a man keeping a self he didn't visit, slowly stopped being a place he kept dark. They didn't move in together fast. Nothing about it was fast. That was the whole point. They'd both learned the hard way what fast and smooth got you. But it filled up anyway, in increments. Emma's drawings went up on the enormous windows that had never had a single thing taped to them. Victoria's terrible cooking happened in a kitchen that had never been cooked in. The scorched grilled cheese came back, on purpose now, a private joke. The worst grilled cheese in a building full of people who could afford chefs. There were family dinners, actual ones, loud and imperfect, Emma narrating, Victoria doing the dinosaur voices that had migrated from books into general use, Nathan learning to just be at the table instead of watching the table to see if it would hold. And it did hold. Not because it was perfect. They fought, they were both stubborn, and both used to running rooms. And Victoria worked too much, and Nathan still had to consciously catch himself before managing a hard conversation. Like a man with a limp who's learned to walk almost normally, but never stops being aware of the leg. There were nights the old fear came up in him, the lever hand, the urge to set up some small test to confirm she wouldn't leave, and the new discipline was that on those nights he told her instead. "I'm scared tonight," he'd say. "I want to test you, and I'm not going to, but I want you to know the urge is there." And she'd say, "Thank you for telling me instead of doing it." And that was the whole machinery of it, the unglamorous engine of the thing, not the absence of the fear, which never fully left, but the choice to name it instead of acting on it. Diane noticed the change before he said anything, the way she'd always noticed his faces. "You stopped grading," she said one day, at a handoff, watching him with Emma. "I can see it. You used to watch her like you were keeping score even with her. You don't anymore." "I'm trying not to." "It's working. She's lighter." Diane paused, and there was something almost like grace in it, the long arc of two people who'd hurt each other badly, finally far enough out to wish each other well. "I'm glad, Nathan. For what it's worth, I'm glad somebody finally got you to put it down. I couldn't. I tried for years and I couldn't, and then I left and told myself it was the money, same as you did." She shrugged. "Turns out we were both lying about that. It was never the money. It was the testing. You just needed someone stubborn enough to refuse to be tested." "She refused out loud. Told me she was testing me back. It's a whole thing." "Good for her," Diane said, and meant it. And that was its own small healing. The ex-wife and the new woman never enemies, just two people who'd known different versions of the same frightened man, one of them at the start, and one of them, maybe, for the rest of it. If there's a thing to take from all of it, and a story like this, two people with everything and nothing should leave you with something, or what was the point? It's not the obvious thing, not money can't buy love, which is true but cheap, and which every one of us already knows and ignores anyway. The thing underneath it is smaller and harder, and it's this. The test is the betrayal. Not the lie about money, the testing itself. The moment you decide you need proof that someone loves you before you'll risk loving them back, you've already chosen the wall over the person. You've decided that certainty matters more than the thing you're trying to be certain about. And the cruel mechanics of it are that the test can never give you what you want, because a love that's been tested into existence isn't trust, it's just a verdict. And verdicts can be appealed, and you'll find yourself running the test again and again forever because no amount of passing it ever quiets the fear that made you administer it in the first place. Nathan spent 4 years and 12 women and a fortune in staged misfortunes, learning what his 7-year-old daughter already knew over a bowl of cereal. You don't test people you love, you just love them. And that's terrifying because loving someone without proof means accepting that they could leave and you'd survive it, that the not knowing is the price of the real thing, that a wall keeps out the leaving, but it keeps out the love the same way, through the same gate. There's only the one gate. Victoria knew it from the other side. She'd watched a whole class of people get so rich and so guarded that they walled themselves into beautiful empty houses, certain the world was a con. Not wrong about the con, but so busy defending against it that they let the con win anyway, alone, safe, and starving. Two people who'd armored up against being used, and the armor had done exactly what armor does, which is keep everything out, the bad and the good alike, until a broken-down diner and a spilled chocolate milk in a child's hand in a crowded museum had found the one unguarded gap in each of them. They got married, eventually, small, at the diner, which Rosa allowed only because Victoria begged and only on the condition that it didn't interrupt the late shift. So they fed the late crowd first and got married after, in the empty dining room at midnight, Emma as the entire wedding party, Hector crying in a corner and pretending he wasn't, Rosa officiating with 70 years of authority and no legal standing whatsoever, which they fixed properly the next week at a courthouse, but which counted, to all of them, as the real one. There were no vows about forever. They'd both learned what never and forever were worth in the mouths of frightened people. The vow Nathan made, the only one, the one he'd worked months to be able to mean, was, "I will tell you the truth, even when it costs me, even when a lie would be kinder, even when I'm scared you'll leave, and I will never test you again. I'll just love you, and let that be enough, even on the days it terrifies me that it might not be." And Victoria's was the same, in her own words, with the diner quiet around them and the city full of people who wanted things sleeping outside in the dark. It wasn't a perfect life after that. He wants to be clear about that, the man telling you this, whoever you imagine him to be. It would be one more lie to wrap it up smooth, and the whole point of the thing was learning to stop wrapping things up smooth. They had hard years mixed in with the good ones. Victoria nearly worked herself into the ground twice, and Nathan had to learn to say, "come home," without it being a test of whether she would. Emma became a teenager, which is its own apocalypse, and tested them both in ways no staged credit card ever could, and they passed it the only way you pass that one, which is by not leaving and not lying and showing up boring and steady on the days she swore she hated them. The penthouse stayed full, the grilled cheese stayed bad. The fear never fully left Nathan, the lever hand, but it got quieter every year he refused to pull it, the way a muscle you stop using goes soft, until one day he realized he hadn't thought about testing her in months, and that the not thinking about it was the closest thing to peace a man like him was ever going to get, and that it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything he'd torn his life apart looking for and had finally found only by setting down the thing he'd been looking with. The two of them, the billionaire and the man who'd faked being broke, the two liars who found each other and almost lost each other over the very lies that brought them together. They built a life that was loud and imperfect and entirely real, founded not on the fortunes they'd both hidden, which turned out not to matter at all, but on the one thing that had been so much harder for both of them than money ever was, the daily, terrifying, unglamorous choice to stop checking whether it was real and just let it be.